Let's bring in Victorian Liberal MP Tim Smith now. He joins us from Melbourne. Thanks for joining us, Tim. The lockdown was unnecessary, wasn't it?
Completely unnecessary, Chris, and good evening to you and to all of your viewers right around Australia. A ridiculous overreaction, using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And as Paul Sakal from The Age asked at that press conference today quite brilliantly, all the close contacts of the workers from hotel quarantine had been isolated as of last Friday. So there was no real community transmission. That's the whole point. So the cases that dripped out over the weekend were the further close contacts of hotel quarantine workers. Now, let's go back to brass tacks. These workers should never got the virus in the first place. There's been 3 major breaches of virus control, of controls within hotel quarantine over the last 2 weeks. And that's why these workers got the virus. They should never have got the virus. But then, thankfully, the close contacts were isolated, and the only people that got that virus were the close contacts of the workers, this very terrible UK strain that Daniel Andrews carries on about. Why were we locked down for 5 days?
Yeah, I just want to come back to that. Let's allow for the leaking of the virus outside hotel quarantine. Let's put that to one side. Obviously, you've got to minimise that as much as you can, but clearly it's going to happen from time to time, as it has happened in other parts of the country. But the key point here is most of what we knew about this outbreak, we knew on Friday already. You say now, of course, the lockdown was unnecessary. Many of us were saying that at the time. Why did the opposition, why did the Victorian Liberal opposition not outright oppose the lockdown on Friday?
I think we did, didn't we? And I've certainly been very strong in my views against this lockdown, and I've said time and time again, lockdown should be the absolute last resort, and the gold standard in this country, indeed what would constitute state Liberal policy, is what Gladys Berejiklian has done most brilliantly in New South Wales, which is a proportionate response. Where you do have outbreaks, you keep the lockdown as localised as possible, as we saw with the Northern Beaches outbreak before Christmas.
Well, we had your Shadow Health spokesperson, Georgie Crozier, on the program on Friday. She wouldn't oppose the lockdown. She wanted to see more information. She had to say that she would go along with the same health advice that Daniel Andrews was citing.
Well, look, I can't speak for Georgie. All I can say is that we have been very strong as a team, indeed very strong as an opposition, indeed as a Liberal Party, opposing disproportionate and ridiculous measures that do far more harm than good, that have caused a mental health crisis. I mean, there were 3,500 calls to Lifeline on Saturday, the 3rd highest number of calls to that organisation in its history. I mean, locking people down immediately causes mayhem for businesses. I mean, the hospitality sector here in Melbourne lost $100 million over the last 5 days. And Daniel Andrews couldn't even say this morning, Chris, whether or not these hard-working small business owners and their staff would receive any compensation. So I'm completely opposed to these reactionary and ridiculous short-term lockdowns that achieve nothing, that are clearly more about trying to scare the hell out of people than sound public policy or indeed health advice.
Well, we've got to get some sort of threshold in place, don't we? Daniel Andrews and other state premiers need to announce or reveal some sort of threshold for when they will impose these drastic measures, because surely 2 locally acquired cases a day cannot be sufficient justification to lock down 6.5 million people.
Completely agree with you. And for my fellow Victorians in Mildura and remote East Gippsland, in Swan Hill, even Wodonga, who are miles, hundreds of kilometres from Melbourne, who have been locked down, forced to wear a mask outside, the pubs closed, the cafes closed, the school kids sent home. I mean, you just can't justify this sort of behaviour. It's disproportionate. It's frankly totalitarian. And this is how he scares people by these ridiculous decisions that frankly have no basis in fact.
Now, speaking about scaring people, what about talking about the virus as moving at the speed of light, faster than anything we've seen in the country before, calling the virus smart and getting smarter? I mean, this is ridiculous ridiculous statements to be making in a public health framework, aren't they?
Well, Chris, I'm really glad you asked about this so-called UK variant that's grown horns and legs and can jump corridors and run around the corner and has a pulse. It is transmitted to 14.7% of an infected person's close contacts. The original Wuhan strain will transmit to 11% of their close contacts. So it's about 30% more infectious. It's not 70 times more infectious that the Victorian Health Minister, Martin Foley, tried to kid us with over the weekend. So let's get this into perspective. It is more infectious. It's not wildly more infectious. It's not a different virus that Daniel Andrews is trying to persuade us that it is. It's the same virus. It's a different variant, not a different strain. And it is not moving at the speed of sound. It is moving. It is more infectious, but not that more infectious. And if you have good infection control methods and protocols in hotel quarantine and a good contact tracing system, you will get this virus under control. I say again, look at New South Wales. There have been 25 cases of the UK variant in New South Wales hotel quarantine, and it has not leaked out of Gladys's hotels. Why? Because they've got the best team in the country doing it. That's how you manage this virus, not mass lockdowns, panicking, and poor infection control in hotels, like you see in Victoria all the time. And without sounding like a broken record, we had a 4-month-long lockdown last year, Chris, because of these very failures, 801 deaths. We then had the Coate inquiry that cost millions of dollars, went on for months. We all thought it was a farce. Former Judge Coate made a number of recommendations about improving hotel quarantine, and over the last 2 weeks, we've seen about a half a dozen breaches of those recommendations. Andrews promised that he'd learnt everything from that disaster of last year. Well, clearly he hasn't. And my message to the Victorian Premier is please pick up the phone, speak to Gladys, ask her to send her officials down to Melbourne and teach your officials, Daniel, how to do hotel quarantine properly and safely.
It can be done. It is being done in New South Wales. Thanks for joining us, Tim Smith.
Thanks, Chris.
Tim Smith there in Melbourne.